Hello YouTube and welcome to an all new Elder Scrolls lore video. A little different this time around, as today I'm handling a requested topic by Mr. Slav Howard from the Discord that I found particularly interesting. The differences that some gods, Daedra and other deities have went throughout this Elder Scrolls series, so how they've changed. So strap in, as this will be quite a dive into some of the older parts of the series. So before we can talk truly about this topic, I'll say that this video does have two timestamp chapters. The first one being the differences from the Elder Scrolls 1 Arena to the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, and after that some of the major changes made after Daggerfall. This distinction is important, as the Elder Scrolls Arena has many pieces of lore not considered truly canon at this point, as even the developers have admitted that the lore by then was in its infancy and not taken very seriously, as everything in Arena was loosely based on some D&D campaign by the writers of the game. So there are quite some interesting little differences that we will go over. Now with the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, the lore as we know it came into shape. Many of the differences and the deities that we know now are basically the same as they were back then, but they're developed more, yet not really changed. However, there are some changes made and strange omissions from the series, which I will go over as I will illustrate some interesting points. Anyway, let's start with the Elder Scrolls 1 Arena. So, like I said, the Elder Scrolls 1 Arena is not particularly considered canon at this point. The overall story is, but many of the lore bits aren't. And with very good reason, as some of the lore that we get, of which there is not a lot to begin with anyway in the game, goes completely contrary to what we have come to expect of the series. First of all, and most glaringly, we have the absence of the 9 divines, except for the goddess Kinnereth. All the conventional divines are missing from Arena. They would be added only in Daggerfall, with the exception of Talos, of whom we'll talk about later, as he's his own beast entirely. Anyway, the 7 other divines were added in Daggerfall and named after beta testers of the game. But this means that in Arena, which became before Daggerfall obviously because it's the Elder Scrolls 1, the palettes of god and goddesses is significantly smaller and misses a lot of the ones that we know now. The gods that are mentioned in the game, as far as I can find, are Kinnereth, Boethia, the Mad God, Auriel, Finister, Xerxes, Magnus, Regine and Daedra. But here's the thing, these gods in Arena, most of them aren't even gods. There's no mention of Boethia being a Daedra. In fact, the whole concept of Daedra did not exist yet and was simply mentioned to be a dark elven goddess instead of a Daedra. There's also the Mad God, likely referring to what would later become Sheogorath, but not really named yet as such. Auriel is not a fully godly deity yet, but is mentioned as a demigod. Finister, Xerxes and Magnus were all revered mages without any mention of them being deities. Only later entries in the series, like Daggerfall, made them deities. Daedra wasn't a god, it was just the name of the volcano in Morrowind's center. Regine, the later Khajiit god of tricks and thieves, was just some guy. A mighty thief in his own right, but in the game he was just some guy who recently died and is more of an infamous thief and not really the god that had existed since before the first Mains of Elsewhere, like he is in the lore now. And then there's also some gods who only appeared in the Elder Scrolls 1 Arena and then never again. First there's the god Seth, a deity of whom we know very little, other than that he was worshipped by a Brotherhood of Sorts, the Brotherhood of Seth, of whom Jaegar Tharn was a part of before he became the Emperor's Battle Mage. The interesting thing here is that the god Seth did get one other mention in later games, specifically in the in-game fictional novel The Mystery of Talara. In that novel, which is fictional in the universe, so it's fictional in a fictional universe from our perspective, in that novel, a temple of the god Seth makes an appearance, but since the novel is fictional in the game, it basically means that Seth is no longer considered an actual deity in the Elder Scrolls universe, as he's been relegated to a fictional one. Or maybe he is an actual one, but we just don't see it anywhere. Then we have several gods and goddesses without any lore to them, which never make an appearance again. Specifically, in the Elder Scrolls Arena, there's an Argonian mother goddess. You have Shagrath, the god of spiders, the goddess Rihanna, the god Baal, and the god Agramanus. All these never make an appearance again, although it's possible that, for example, Shagrath was the inspiration for Mephala. Maybe, but we aren't sure. That said, other than Boethia, which is a dark elven goddess in this game and not a Daedra, all Daedric princes do not appear in Arena, nor does Morrowind's Tribunal of Living Gods, despite them being definitely alive at that point in time, which was near the Third Era, as the Tribunal came to be during the First Era. But yeah, a lot of omissions from the first entry in the series. However, something else that's interesting in Arena is that it introduces a pair of holy figures who are revered all around Tamriel, whom we do hear of again sometimes in the series, but don't seem to be as revered as in Arena. These are the lovers of Polydor and Eloisa, who have their own holiday, Heart's Day, which is basically a sort of Valentine's Day, which is celebrated as the Day of Love around Tamriel. On this day, the legend of their love is recounted around Tamriel. We don't really know what their legend is, but someone on Reddit made a pretty interesting Apocrypha post, so an interpretation of what it could have been. Not canon, mind you, but an interpretation of a fan, and I'd say it's worth the read. The link of that is in the description. Anyway, before we make the switch to the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, some more curiosities that I picked up in the Elder Scrolls 1 Arena. First of all, it seems that divine artifacts in this game seem to have a will and mind of their own in the lore, much like how the One Ring in The Lord of the Rings has its own mind, which I think was the inspiration at the time for this concept. Second, several Daedric artifacts from later games make an appearance in this game, like Nocturnal Skeleton Key, but they are not associated with their respective Daedric princes, as those were not yet a thing back in the day when the game came out. And that's basically what I can say about Arena. A lot of things which were changed later and in some cases completely abandoned in later parts of the series. Which, like I said, isn't really strange, as a lot of Arena's lore was loosely based on some D&D campaign that some of the devs had running. It was only with Daggerfall that they started to really take the lore seriously, and as such Daggerfall forms the basis for most of the Elder Scrolls lore that we have today. Not a lot of changes were made to the primary deities that were introduced in the game, as it is here where we meet the Divines, except Talos, and we meet most of the Daedric princes, except Jiggalag. These deities all haven't changed all that much since their conception and have basically stayed the same, save for some minor developments when the situation called for it, like Molag Bal getting added the title the Prince of Slavery and Domination in addition to his title as the Prince of Schemes. But almost none of the developments that I could find were particularly striking or strange, as almost everything fell perfectly within the established spheres of those princes or divines, and it basically made sense. That said, in Daggerfall, the Tribunal of Living Gods of Morrowind, Almalexia, Surthasil and Vivec, was not yet a thing, and neither was there a specific link between Azura and Mephala and the Dark Elves. Only Boethia was specifically linked to them through the previous game. Azura's curse, which turned the Dark Elves into the Dark Elves, which came as a result of the Tribunal's possible betrayal, also was not a thing, meaning that the Dark Elves, for all terms and purposes, in Daggerfall and Arena had always been Dark Elves, meaning that the Chimer were not yet concepted at that point. But I'm straying away from the main changes in the deities of the series, as we do have another. You see, orcs only became playable with Morrowind, and before that were considered creatures. They did have some sort of civilization, according to some sources in Daggerfall, but they were not playable, nor were they considered really intelligent creatures. And that's why Malakath, despite resembling an orc in Daggerfall, is not considered linked to the orcs, although his later link may have come as an inspiration from his original looks, as he looked like an orc, so they maybe decided, well, let's link him to the orc since he looks like one anyway. In this game, he's not the Prince of Vengeance and Conflict yet, but he's rather known as the Prince of Lies and Curses. His development and the lore of the conception of the Orsimmers, or the orcs, had not really been conceptualized at this point, but it's kinda there nonetheless, as he's considered patron of the cursed. So you could link him to the orcs that way, but the whole conception of the orcs hadn't come into the lore yet. So yeah, the basis was there, but that really only came with Morrowind. That said, while we're talking about Daedric princes, by the people of Tamriel they were often seen as demons. They weren't really seen as gods as such by most, but more as demons to be summoned. A lot of people really refer to the Daedric princes as demons in the game. And considering some, like Maroon's Dagon, literally talk like demonic cavemen in the game, I kinda understand that. Now, to turn back to the 8 divines who were introduced in the game, something interesting is that in Daggerfall each region had their own patron deity, something which we don't really see that much of anymore in the later installments of the series, such as the Isle of Balfira having Akatosh as its specific patron god. There were also many more holidays around Tamriel, some of them being specifically dedicated to a certain god. This is actually something that I still want to do a video on, so stay tuned for a video on the holidays of Tamriel at some point in the future, probably around Christmas. Now, someone that we haven't really mentioned so far is Talos, an important deity for the Empire in the Third Era in the series after Daggerfall, yet in Daggerfall Talos isn't there as a god. There are no temples to him, no priests whatsoever. However, there's a reason for that, as Talos the god is not just Tiber Septim. To oversimplify a bit, Talos is made up of 3 entities, Tiber Septim primarily, but also Wolfhearth and Zurin Arctus. This whole thing and how it works is deserving of its own video at some point, but in short and very oversimplified, so please don't be angry with me if you're really into this part of the lore. Some of the essence of Talos, the god, was locked into something called the Mantella, which plays a part in Daggerfall's story and gets destroyed in the story. With the power of the Mantella released, Talos became a full-fledged god, as he got every part of his essence. Now, here's where things get even more confusing. As Daggerfall ends with a dragon break, an error in time so to say, this dragon break made Talos a full-fledged god retroactively, so it inserted him into history from the moment of Tiber Septim's death, so it made him a god from the part of his death. At least that's how I interpret it, and how they explained away his absence from the earlier games. And how they explain his absence from the Elder Scrolls Online, as Tiber Septim hadn't been born yet and thus couldn't have ascended to godhood. So yeah, oversimplified, but that's basically the reason. But talking about absence from games, Daggerfall, like Arena, does have some gods who've been extremely absent from the later entries since Daggerfall. Most famously the deity Ebenarm, Redguard god of war. This guy had some meat to him, just like the Redguard god of luck, Sai. These two deserve their own videos, definitely, as their story has some meat to it, so I'll probably make one soon. But if you can't wait, I know some other YouTubers made videos on them as well. I haven't seen them yet, so I can't guarantee the quality of those videos, but feel free to check out the competition if you like for now. Just kidding, of course. Stay on this channel, but if you do want, Google Sai and Ebenarm in YouTube and you'll probably get some hits. Until I made one, of course, because if I made a video, I would feel it's treason if you go to the competition. Anyway, both Ebenarm and Sai basically got omitted from the lore of later entries of the game, with Ebenarm's name even being taken out of a book in the Elder Scrolls Online, leading many to believe that Bethesda straight up retconned these gods. But then they appeared again in some Creation Club content for Skyrim later on, and while the canonicity of Creation Club content is very, very dubious, with some things making no sense at all in my opinion, Bethesda did greenlight those for official releases like the Anniversary Edition, so they weren't super opposed about Ebenarm's inclusion in semi-official content, leading me to believe that his omission from the Elder Scrolls Online isn't really a hard retcon and that we might see him and Sai again. And that said, we do have several other deities that we have not seen in the series since Daggerfall, that we know very little of as of now. Specifically, we have Ren, a Breton god of architecture, Jimsei, the Redguard or Breton god of music, Colwyn, the Breton god of lore, this is obviously my guy, Virgil, Redguard god of the sea, and then 4 deities of whom we have no idea what their spheres of influence are, but we know that they have shrines. I'm talking about the deities Bandi, Dugrot, Mai, and Strenner. These gods or deities have no specific sphere of influence defined, and we know literally nothing about them except for their name. Part of the reason that could have been is time constraints on the part of the developers, as from half-finished content in the files of Daggerfall, we at least know that Virgil, god of the sea, should have had some sort of quest to his name, which was never finished. So this may be the case for many of these unknown deities. That said, those were most of, if not all of, the striking differences and omissions I could find from earlier parts of the series when talking about the gods and the deities. There was quite some stuff in here that I had no idea about, like especially some of the gods that have been omitted from the lore later on, so I hope you learned something as well, and I hope you enjoyed learning them. So if you did, I hope that you'll return for the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Now, before I end this video, as usual, allow me to say that I hope to see you again. And allow me to thank my top Patreon supporters, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Polo Rasputin, Athena Iotis, King Chris, Scramble the Scrolls, Doji, Fenrir, Soto Bushido, Zar Mikhail, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to these people and all the other people on screen that this channel stays alive, even in the times when I have very little time to make videos and to do research. So yeah, it's thanks to these people that I can keep doing this, and I really want to thank them for it. That said, I hope to see you all in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.